If you have been enjoying Edinburgh Business Stories and you want to keep up to date with some of the new episodes we've got coming out every other week, then why not subscribe? The stories, the guests we have are absolutely incredible and we wouldn't want you to miss out. Fraser, so great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, give us a snapshot of who you are and what you do.
My name is Fraser Smeaton. I am one of the founders of a business called AFG Media, which has two brands. One is MorphCostumes, and we sell thousands of different costume designs, and Royal and Awesome, which sells multicolored, fun golf clothing.
Amazing. It's a bit of a sequel, I guess, because we had your brother Graham on episode 13, and we sort of heard his side of the story, and so he sort of came into the business a little later, whereas you were kind of there from the beginning. So really excited to hear your angle on it all. We won't dwell too much on Graham. So yeah, excited to kind of hear your story. So yeah, let's go back to the beginning. How did this all start? Where did the idea come from?
So this started quite a long time ago now. So we've been in the business 15 years. And if we went back to the beginning of this, myself, my other brother Ali, and Gregor, who are the three of us who founded it in the beginning, we were all working in corporate jobs, but we'd been experimenting with some side hustles before side hustles were called side hustles. We were just doing some stuff in our spare time because we had spare time because we didn't have kids and we were interested in business, and we tried to start a couple of online ideas and they had failed completely.
Like what?
So they were community-based ideas. I don't know if anyone remembers a website called dig.com. It was D-I-G-G, and it was one of the top 10 websites in the world at the time. Basically took links from different newspaper websites, and they all went on one page, which was the sort of comparison page or the aggregation page, and then people voted them up or down, and therefore the ones who got enough votes went to the front page. So it took the world's news and filtered it into what people thought was the most interesting. And these were mainly focused on US politics and US tech. So we thought, hang on, this would be really interesting. We could do this with sports news because there's lots of different sports opinions and people are interested and want to debate around that. And also sports advertising is quite valuable. So we could put all that together. But we made it was one of those learning experiences. We made a lot of mistakes. We didn't really know what we were doing. And crucially, we understood that, we found out with hindsight that community-based businesses are really hard unless you have significant startup cash, because you need to recruit thousands of people to make sure they have the momentum on their own of people posting links and commenting on links and voting links. And we could never get to critical mass. So we did a load of work in our spare time and we made 50 euros of revenue. Paddy Power gave us 50 euros for one advert.
Wow, that's a good one.
And that's it. But ultimately, it's one of those hindsight stories that we learned how to build websites, we learned how to buy URLs, and then when the idea for Morphsuits, which became MorphCostumes, came along, we had some skills that probably meant we were more able to be more successful more quickly. So it really is one of those, the more things you try, and even if you fail, you're going to bank some learnings that could well come in handy in the future.
Yeah. And I noticed that you said Morphsuits became Morphcostumes. Can you give us a bit more on that?
Yeah, so Morphsuits were the all-in-one spandex costumes, covered your head to toe, and they are the original product that got our foot in the door in this industry, and they were a massive success. They were so different and so viral, and how we actually got into it was we were on a boys' weekend in Dublin, and one of our friends turned up in this all-in-one spandex suit he'd found on eBay, and literally 100 people stopped watching street theatre to take his picture, and like 20 people raced over to us and like, what is that? Where do you buy that? That is amazing. And we'd worn fancy dress in the past, and most people just looked at you with disdain. We had never seen a reaction like this before. So we thought, well, this is amazing. And because we were at that time of life when we were going on stag do's, etc., we wore them to a few more events, and the reaction was always the same. And then it was actually one night we were walking home from an event a bit early to go and work on our failing sports news business, making that sacrifice. And we were like, God, we should just try and sell these suits. Everyone wants them. And that was a light bulb moment, and we never did any more work on the sports website, and we started working on starting off Morphsuits, which then ultimately became MorphCostumes, because after a time we needed to branch out of just spandex suits. That's a niche of a niche, and we now have thousands of costume designs across all different structures and looks.
So at one point, Morphsuits was 100% of the business, and now it's only it's a player, but it's a smaller.
Absolutely, yeah. So for we started in 2009. We sold our first one on May the 8th, and it was only Morphsuits, lots of different designs of spandex suits until probably late 2014. But at that point, we started to spread out the designs, and we've really built on our designs since then. And it's now less than 10% of the business.
Yeah. Well, I remember because obviously I worked with with your brother Graham, and when he told me about it, and I had a smile on my face. I thought, oh God, this sounds like a fun product, but is it a serious business? Do you know? And I guess you fast forward 15 years to kind of hear where you've got to, and it's phenomenal.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a product that makes people laugh, and it was so new and so viral in terms of the all-in-one spandex costume. We never thought it was serious. Our first business plan was we were going to sell 20,000 units because it was a side hustle. And we thought there were only the 20,000 people who would want to wear an all-in-one spandex suit, which was a massive underestimation of even a niche product like that. I mean, we would have sold well over 2 million, and we're still selling spandex suits. But your point around whether it's a serious business or not, as we got into the industry, we began to see the scale of costumes. So over the last 10, 15 years, Halloween has grown in the UK. It's also growing around Europe as it becomes another occasion on the calendars that people like to celebrate. And as we all restrict the chocolate that our kids get, our kids love Halloween because it's a day they get chocolate. So it's getting bigger and bigger here. But of course, in America, it's been huge for decades. And the insight into it being a serious business was when we went to the first trade show in America and we saw the scale there. Because if you think you've got 300 to 400 million relatively wealthy consumers in the US market, and over a third of them dress up for Halloween. And then on top of that, you've got decorations, accessories, etc. And they say that's over 100 million costumes getting sold. So what we then saw was there are 3 and potentially more billionaire families that have been working in costumes, and it's a pretty simple business model. They have great designs of costumes that they then sell to the major retailers in the US. They make about 30% gross margin on those sales, or between 25 and 35. And then they take their fixed costs off that. So if you're looking at a business that's doing 120 million, to make the maths easy, 30% gross margin, you got 40 million. And if you've got fixed costs of under 20, you can be banking 20 million a year. So you can see how it stacks up, and people over years grow some pretty substantial businesses. That opened our eyes to it. We haven't achieved that yet, but we're on our journey. Hopefully get there one day.
And it's interesting because earlier on, just off camera, you shared kind of the strap line, which I like.
Yeah, so it's a fun product, but it's a serious business.
I like that.
And it's important to us that people understand that, because sometimes the product is so fun that people think we're just mucking around having a party all day. Of course we're not. We're like any business. We believe in incremental gains, and we are striving to make every bit of the business better, from the fun side of getting the designs right and the advertising right, but also to the nitty gritty of making sure that the production is of a high quality, it is delivered on time, that we're making sure that our cases are the right size so that we're optimizing the cost of shipping both to the consumer and across the oceans. So we get into some pretty deep detail to build a proper business here. But at the same time, it's nice to have a fun product at the center of it, because that inspires people, keeps them motivated, and it's more fun to work on something fun.
So talk us through then that kind of, at the beginning you kind of have this one concept. You start going like, how do we manufacture this? And then your journey to now where you've got thousands of designs, and what has your journey been through working, having it made overseas, I assume, talk us through what that journey's been.
So some of it at the beginning, it's one of those ones that we give a lot of thanks to Google, because you basically had to approach problems that you had no idea how to solve with Googling things and then applying basically a rational thought process to it. So we all had business backgrounds. I was at British Telecom running their marketing for the broadband business. Gregor was at Procter & Gamble. Ali had been at Ernst & Young and then at Barclays. So we knew the fundamentals of business, but we didn't know anything about the actual category that we were getting into. So we had to apply those business fundamentals to a new category. So I'd heard of Alibaba.com, and that was our first place to get things manufactured. So we sent out an email there. You got 3 or 4 responses. We soon realized that 3 of them were the same people. So we were left with 2, and we weighed them up against each other and we went for it. And I guess one of our mantras, and I still believe in it through the business, is to test small and test quickly and see if it works. So you don't want to bet the house. And that's really true when you're placing your first order with someone you've never met on the other side of the world. I mean, they could have taken our money and disappeared. And if we'd put all of our savings into that, we would have been finished. We didn't put all our savings in, and they didn't disappear. So we had a double win, and we managed to get off the ground. Now, was our manufacturing great in the first instance? No. Again, it's been a journey of getting better and better at that. Other stories around that were right at the beginning when we started launched, we had the stock, the 200 costumes we bought in my bedroom in my flat share in Stockwell in London. And Gregor would come round after work and we'd download the orders from the website and he'd read them out, I'd write them on the envelopes and we'd stick the envelope shut. And we'd carry them to work in a hold all the next day and sneak out the office to get to the only post office in the city of London and then stand there for about 45 minutes. So this was not sustainable. Also, 200 costumes take up a lot of space in your bedroom, more than I expected. So this is a long way of saying we had to find a 3PL website. And I will always remember the first one I phoned, I don't know who it was, but I phoned them and asked for the quote. And they said, yeah, absolutely, we could do all this kind of stuff for you. And the way we charge is we take a percentage of your revenue. And I was like, that is a ridiculous way to charge. What happens if I was selling diamonds? They're really small and really expensive, and you would want a huge fee for selling something small. Where, for example, if I was selling footballs, they're really big and cheap, and you'd charge me a small amount of money for that. It doesn't make any sense. So that's almost how you applied your sort of basic business common sense to make good decisions in areas you knew nothing about. So I was like, this doesn't make sense. I'll phone the next guy. And then the next guy was, we have a set cost, and this is how we do it. It's a storage, it's a pick, pack, and post fee. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Stick it in the P&L. Okay, we still make profit. Brilliant. We'll go with you. And then we're into it, and you can then refine from there as you learn more and you get different perspectives.
What were people saying at this point? And so you had a serious job at the time, and then you had this thing where you were running off to post costumes from the post office.
At the very beginning, no one was bothered because everyone thought it was going to be really small, and it was just a side hustle. And people thought, well, just go for it, have a bit of fun. You might sell the 20,000 that you're trying to sell. I guess more of the raised eyebrows came after a year. So we sold over £1 million worth in the first year. It just went absolutely crazy. The same reaction we'd always seen when we wore them to events. Continued whenever anyone else wore them. So it became very, very viral. Every one we sold was a walking advert. So we sold more of each one we sold, and it just multiplied from there. But then when we were saying we had to leave our jobs after a year, people were saying, you're leaving blue chip jobs on good career paths to go and do what? So at that point, there were a lot of doubts. But again, I think we'd always managed the risk pretty well. So we knew we were profitable. We knew we were growing fast. Our run rate was over 4 million at that point. We didn't have commitments. We didn't have kids. We weren't married. We didn't have mortgages. So worst case, we could have found another job. But actually, certainly for Gregor and I, our employers offered us sabbaticals. So we had all the risks covered at that point. So I guess that's another good point. Is that you test small, test quick, and do everything you can to mitigate the risk. And we followed through on that at that point.
Do you remember that conversation, like where you were like, are we doing this? Was there like a pivotal moment?
I do remember sitting in a car with Gregor, because we actually all really enjoyed our corporate jobs, and we were like, should we do this? I'm not sure, but kind of we've got to. Like, when are we ever going to get an opportunity like this? Because remember, the only other businesses we'd started were these ones that had made no revenue or 50 euros of revenue. And this is going so crazy that we just really felt we had to, and we had to go for it. But again, when you were serious about it, going back to that fun product, serious business, we thought there isn't really much of a downside to doing this. We can get back to where we were should it not work out. So it was okay from that. And then when we did manage to apply ourselves full-time to it, it started to grow even faster.
What's been quite impressive, just kind of knowing you guys over the years as well, and just seeing where you're at, is the idea of that. You three brothers, and you got Gregor as well, and you've all stuck together. You took that leap together, and you've stayed together. So what's the dynamic like then, kind of working with family and friends, and how have you done it?
So we've done it by being entirely objective on every decision. So I think where things fall down are when people form alliances that they stick to no matter what, rather than looking at each decision. We definitely have arguments, but the arguments are always on the merits of the decision that we are trying to answer. So it helps us get to a better answer, rather than me always siding with a brother or me always siding with a friend, and therefore you get bitterness, etc. I also think we would rather the business failed than we fell out. And that ensures that the business won't fail and that we don't fall out. So putting those two things together is really helpful. I also think having 3 or 4 is useful because it gives a pressure release valve. When I look at other people who run businesses, of course, there are many sole founders who are very successful, but in quite a lot of cases they can make, and I see it in smaller businesses, they can make silly decisions because there is no one to share that decision with. And when they have a bit of a brain fart, there's no one to tell them that that's the wrong decision. Also, when you get to 2, I can see it get quite tense because there is no pressure release, and you've got these decisions you care about that are super important, and there's no one to go to say, oh gosh, I'm fed up with that person, they always do this, etc. And there's no external perspective who can say, no, they're only approaching it from this thing, it's all right, they're a good guy. And therefore the tension can get too much in a 2-person business and people can fall out. So our 3 to 4 has worked well. And actually, we've got our finance director, Graham Menzies, who's been with us for a long time as well. And we run it as a team, more like a board. So again, we are serious and we're professional rather than being a family business. And taking those structures that have been proven to work over generations in other businesses and make sure we follow that best practice really stands us in good stead.
And again, if I may, how did you kind of arrive on who was the CEO?
This is going to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but it's actually one of the moments I'm proudest of how we worked together. And it was when the BGF were investing in us. They said we had to have a CEO. Right. And we were all sat in a room, and I said, no, we're not going to do that. And the other 2, Gali and Gregor, said, no, we've thought about this and we want you to do it. Not because I'm any better than them at anything, but I am less good at any one specific thing. So Ali is very good at detail and finance. So he was the finance director at that point, and Gregor is an incredible sales and marketing person. Yeah. And I am just a generalist. So
right, okay.
So
but again,
it was a good fit of skills. Yeah. And so that's what we went with, and it's
but objectively looking at the situation again and just coming up with
trying to come up with the best solution for the business. Yeah. And again, not letting any egos get in the way, etc. We also all make sure we're rewarded the same, we're all paid the same, and that's been crucial as well. The other thing I see other people do is someone has a good year in sales and says, I need to get paid more, and you're one of the founders of the same business, or someone makes a mistake and the other person says you need to get paid less. We have all made great decisions in the business, and we've all made terrible mistakes in the business, and we've all made sure we're rewarded the same, and we understand it's part of the process, and that just keeps that tension out of it as well.
And how have you then balanced in terms of maybe it's not the responsibility, but like the idea that you're going off to play golf today, and everyone and the other brothers are at work, and there's that balance then where there could be a point. I know you talk about the 4 you can bounce off, but how have you found that to be like, some of you might feel like you do less versus others?
It's a really good question, and we handle that by making sure we all try and work harder than the other people. So we have a responsibility to do that rather than have a race to who can take the most holidays versus the other people, because then you get into a vicious circle of it's not fair and you're not pulling your weight, versus taking responsibility and making sure that you're trying to outdo and work harder than the other people. And it's just a nuance of how you think about it and present it, but it makes sure you don't fall into that trap. We're also very clear that we're running, again, a professional business. We are not trying to run a lifestyle business or a family business in that respect. So we wouldn't get to the situation where people are doing part-time jobs or not. You're either fully engaged or you're not fully engaged. And we are fully engaged, trying to go after the opportunity that we see in this industry.
Yeah, because that's interesting, because as you grow and then you get to a good place where the business is profitable, you got a great team, you're handing off responsibility, the natural assumption is, I'll just take an extra couple of weeks here or there, or, whereas I think that's really, again, it comes back to this mantra of serious business, right?
Yeah. I think if you're an executive, that's very difficult to do, because that will then infiltrate the culture of the rest of the business, and people will see that, the boss isn't doing very much, or they're not working as hard as us, so we're going to not work as hard. Whereas everyone is striving, it sets the business on a professional footing, and it will mean you can hire better people who are wanting to work hard and achieve more. And if you step away from that and move to a situation where you're just trying to keep the business in one place, I think that's when you lose your edge. And actually, it's difficult to keep it in one place, and you'll end up going backwards. So if any of us wanted to, and this may happen in the future, move to a sort of non-exec or advisor position, that would be absolutely fine. But I think it is very hard not to be going full bore at something when you've got an executive role. And I think in a growing company. And I think if you're not a growing company, it's very difficult to remain a viable company. So we want to stay a growing company.
And again, just on the along the way, you've made tons of decisions. One of them was obviously to sell. You used to sell direct, didn't you? And then you moved to Amazon. Is that?
So we used to have more of a wholesale model.
More of a wholesale.
Website.
Yes.
So
okay.
when we first started, it was website.
Yeah.
And then we saw the scale you could reach through wholesale.
Yeah.
And then as time and platforms moved forward, we began to realize that a lot of our wholesale business was moving on to Amazon. So we were selling to people and giving them a margin to allow them to sell on Amazon. And we were selling on Amazon as well. So if you look at the unit economics of that, you're like, okay, we've got again, to keep the maths easy, we've got a £50 costume. We're wholesaling it to this person at £25, and we're making £5 a costume. If we were to sell that and capture the retail margin ourselves, we might make £20 or £15 on that costume. And the crucial insight was understanding that by selling it to multiple people, you weren't selling any more units. So you were just trading a £5 per unit profit for a £15 per unit profit. And then further, as we got into that, we also realized that having multiple people was impacting your ability to have control of the advertising, the content, and ultimately the volume. So by doing it all of ourselves, we captured more retail margin per unit, and we started to sell more units. And so that really transformed the business and links back to our overall story that we were very, very successful with Morphsuits as a single product. But then from 2012 onwards, we became almost a victim of our own success with the spandex costumes that we had been sold so many of them. They weren't as new and different, and people weren't as excited by them. And the demand started to tail off. We also got more competition coming into the market, so our margins were compressed, and we made mistakes as a management team through that period in that we didn't have a good plan. I think we didn't grasp the nettle. We were hoping more than planning based on reality, and we hired too many people into a business that didn't have a viable strategy at that point. And that all came to a head in 2015, which was the hardest part of the business, where we massively missed our targets and we lost over £1 million. And if you think we made just under 4 million in profit in 2012, to then have seen the top of the mountain and been that successful, and then worked really hard for the next 3 years to reduce that by nearly 5 million was a really, really tough time. And we had to stand up and say that to the company and make over half the company redundant after that Halloween, which was just really, really tough. But from then on, we made that change because we realized how much of our business was going through Amazon. And if we captured that retail margin, we'd be able to save the business in the short term. That gave us the cash and time headroom to be able to move from Morphsuits to MorphCostumes and start expanding our range into the wider costume market, which has been the journey that we have been on since then, and which has been very successful. And the business is nearly 10 times bigger than it was at that point.
Is it like get a whiteboard out and then have a few beers and think about what would be a funny costume? Like draw a man on someone's shoulders. What?
I'm not going to say there isn't a tiny part of that, because actually, it's a really important point. The underlying growth of our business comes from data. We have the ability to see and analyze huge amounts of data of what is selling online. So we know what is selling. We can see opportunities where we can win across the marketing mix and create a better mousetrap of that costume. And that has really underpinned our growth since 2015. The ability to do that, the ability to understand what matters to the consumer, the ability to create those products and run that process at scale. So that's how we've gone from having no costumes to over 1,000 different costumes in that time, and having a success rate of over 85% of what we launch. The fun bit on top of that is, yes, there is from time to time, there is lightning strikes of creative inspiration.
Yeah.
What we realized is you can't rely on that. So that has to be the icing on top of the cake. It is very difficult to have a business plan that says I'm going to have 3 amazing ideas a year because you don't know what ideas are amazing. But you can give yourself a little bit of budget to try it. So I am very happy as long as we've got that underlying data-driven product development powering our growth, we can find some massive wins. And we have had that. So we invented the inflatable alien that carries you around costume, which you may have seen.
Yep.
Difficult to describe on a verbal podcast, but search inflatable alien carrying costume and you'll see it, and you'll have seen it out and about. And we have sold hundreds of thousands of that unit, and we own the copyright worldwide for it. So we basically own that market. So when you come up with things like that, it can be really, really successful. The difficulty is relying on a pipeline of those products, but we have had some, and we continue to work on them.
And so looking at the growth, as you say, you know, since the decline at the £1 million loss 2015, you know, you've grown massively. So I know there's been acquisitions in there, there's been innovation. You know, what would you say are the kind of key planks of the growth?
So if we talked about it, the key driver is more products distributed excellently through Amazon. That is what we do. And then we have some incremental wholesale accounts. So wholesale accounts that we can deal with profitably and at scale, that build the business and don't trade one unit sale that we could have on Amazon for a less profitable sale elsewhere. So they end up being large American retailers. So we deal with Walmart, we deal with Target, Party City, and Spirit are the main 4 accounts that we have, because they have huge scale and they're incremental channels to what we get on Amazon. And the product side of it is 2 halves. It is the data-driven development that we've just talked about, and then acquisition of product lines where we can do it profitably. So there are lots of companies out there who have great products who are not distributing them effectively, either locally or internationally. And one such company was Fun Shack, who we bought in 2019, a range of about 350 to 400 really good costumes, but only being sold wholesale in the UK. So we were able to buy that at a good price based on their performance at that point, and then plug those products into our international distribution. And it was doing about 2 million of revenue when we bought it. It does over 10 million now. Wow. So that ability to scale is really powerful for us. So we've been building that business up to the scale it has got to. We've been developing our own products, and now we are looking for other acquisition opportunities that can allow us to continue to scale, because it's a way you can scale your product line faster than you can develop yourself.
And how have you found that kind of copycat issue, right? Because at Morphsuit at the beginning, I assume you weren't hot on the copyright. It was all new. You were just like, flip and sell. You know, like, what has that journey been? And talk through the complexities of copycats.
So, I mean, it's different. I mean, it's difficult in this industry to protect things. They're all individual designs of concepts that are open market. So it's witches, it's skeletons, it's zombies, it's kings, it's queens. What is good? So you can't really protect those concepts. It's only when you get something entirely unique and you're ready for it. So as we did with the completely new concept of the inflatable alien, and we have some other ones that we have internally at the moment that we think are worth spending the money on patents and copyright, because we think they've got a chance. We think they A, are unique, and B, they've got a chance of us wishing in a couple of years that we had spent that money. So we make those decisions based on that. But at the core of the business of creating more generic costumes, it's about just making better designs. And it's about the nuanced, holistic process of, is that design of a witch, when you can't protect a witch, is it better than the competition's witch? And we have ways of testing that. We use online panels to make sure it wins on that basis. But yes, people will then come along and copy elements of it. They can't copy it entirely, otherwise it would be copyright infringement. But they'll copy elements of it. But then we've got to keep going and continue to create better ones. Which is what we do over time. But one of the really good things about the business is that it is not fashion. It is not the fact that if you don't sell out of your witch costume in 2024, you're not going to be able to sell it in 2025 because the season will have moved on. There is an evergreen element to these products. So it allows us to be braver with stock without having to have the markdowns that you would have in fashion, which is really important. I don't know how the fashion guys do it. But they do it very well. So yeah, it's great that we can continue. We can our products have a long life cycle, so we can invest in them, and the work that we put into creating a good costume will pay back over years.
So talk us through then the investment, because I think that's quite an interesting, you had this massive business growing, it's going quick, and then you decided to take investment. Talk us through that process.
Yep. So we started looking for investment around 2011, 2012, and we ended up taking investment with the Business Growth Fund, who are a large mid-market private equity firm. Well, actually, they don't like me describing them as private equity. They're patient capital, but they provide equity investments, minority equity investments into the business. They took an 18% share in our business, for which they put in £4 million. So it was a good valuation. And we wanted to do that in order that we could have cash to finance our growth as we go forward, but also as we were early in our entrepreneurial careers at that point, to get the benefit of their expertise in helping us professionalize the business. And they are still with us at this point. So they have absolutely lived up to their name of patient capital, because they invested near the top of our first surge of growth. They stuck with us and supported us through the down period to 2015. And then they have stuck with us through the growth period, and we probably would have been able to exit earlier if it hadn't come from the pandemic. The pandemic was not good for selling party costumes. It was good for everyone else selling things online, but not in a world with no parties to sell party clothes. And then since then, we've grown really, really well coming out of that. So I expect they'll be able to realize their investment profitably in the coming months or years, but they have absolutely lived up to their mantra of patient capital. That's not to say there aren't downsides. There always are. You always give up some control. You have to bring in other people, and their opinions have to count when they've got 18%. But on the whole, it's been a really positive relationship, and they've done a good job, and they've helped us, certainly in those early days, get professional and make the right decisions. And that professionalization will have helped us grow and helped us survive bumps in the roads like 2015 and like the pandemic. So yeah, it's been pretty overall beneficial relationship.
And so you mentioned the pandemic. Is there anything of note that you'd like to kind of draw out of that for this podcast, or do you want to just skip over it?
I mean, I wish I could go back in time and skip over those years, but again, it's one of those things that the tough times, if you can stay positive and if you can survive them, they create learnings and they create a toughness in the business that can often pay dividends when you get past it. I mean, I remember it vividly. I was actually having a conversation with the BGF about a week before, and it's difficult to cast our minds back without understanding how the pandemic actually came out. But at that point, it was a bit of a joke. It was a sort of like this flu in China or whatever, and it's not going to be a big thing. And I was sitting there going, our sales are so good. Maybe they're being impacted a little bit by this sort of it coming bug, but we're growing so fast that I can't tell. I can't see if it's happening. So I don't think anything's happening. And then I was actually at Cheltenham on the fateful day when it really became real, and the whole, you could see in the statistics of our sales that the whole of the country and the whole of the world realized this was no longer a joke and this was real. And it was that day that they cancelled Scotland against Wales in the Six Nations. So I think that is what made people sit up and notice that we've cancelled the Six Nations. This is real. I'm not going to be having any parties for which I need a costume in the near future. And our sales from that Thursday to that Friday fell 85%.
Ouch.
And that was shocking. And I thought, we can't survive at 85% down. So this is pretty terrifying. But we were much more experienced by that point. The business was going well, so we had some luck that we were in a resilient position, and we made really good decisions. Credit to our finance director on that. We grasped the nettle in a way that we hadn't grasped the nettle when we'd had our down periods between 2012 and 2015 when we were less experienced. We cut all unnecessary spend. We pulled back on orders. We conserved cash that gave us time to see what was going to play out in a world with a huge number of uncertainties. And actually what did happen, we had 2 or 3 weeks of being about 85% down, which we probably wouldn't have been able to survive if it stayed like that. But actually people started to then buy costumes for Zoom quizzes, and people started to buy costumes to entertain their kids as toys, because online toy industry went through the roof at that point, and we're a subset of toys. So we actually got sales in the UK and Europe back to about 50% down. And in the US, we were maybe only about 10% down, because obviously they had a different approach to the pandemic. And then that was enough for us to be able to survive. We furloughed some people for a short period of time. But then as we got towards Halloween, and we got through to the summer, and we didn't know the pandemic was going to be multi-stage. It looked like it was over. We brought all the people back. Business still wasn't as intense as it had been before. But we brought people back, and we were able to use the time to improve lots of our processes and systems. And we made great leaps forward in that second half of 2020 and through 2021, where volumes were still suppressed, that once the pandemic was gone, we were able to grow really, really fast coming out of it, because we'd improved the fundamentals of the business so much. It was then that we looked at all of our case fills, our packaging sizes. Are they optimized for logistics? Are we shipping air around the world, and is that causing us extra costs? How's our advertising doing? What could we do better? What's our content like? All the things that pile up in that incremental gains theory to make us 1% better at each little thing, but put us far ahead of the competition when you add it all back up. So it was good, but I'm not going to say there wasn't luck. Like I said, we were in a good position to approach the pandemic. If the pandemic had come in 2015, there's no way we would have survived. But the business was resilient. We were also lucky that no lockdowns hit Halloween, because you can imagine what would have happened then. And there was I think it was 2020 when we went into sort of different zones, or that there were discussions that we needed another lockdown coming through October, and that was the most scary time, because we've shipped all the product, so we've paid for the advertising, we've paid for the logistics, and if Halloween had got cancelled by a lockdown, everyone would have sent it back. And it wouldn't have been we would have just lost the revenue. We would have incurred the cost and not had the revenue, and we wouldn't have survived that. But eventually, actually, the lockdown happened a week later, and that is blind luck.
Yeah. But you'll take it.
But we'll take it. We absolutely will take it. And both Halloweens were unaffected. Obviously, they were affected by the general sort of cloud of the pandemic, but they weren't affected by legal lockdowns in the UK. So we got away with that. And also just the cultural relevance and power of Halloween as an occasion in the US, they kept buying costumes, whether it was because they were in states where there weren't lockdowns, or whether it was because they were celebrating Halloween on Instagram. We were only about 10% down in the US, and those points combined to allow us to survive the pandemic, and we used the time wisely, which then got us growing coming out of it.
Was your manufacturing impacted?
It wasn't impacted as in, well, actually we managed that really well, and credit to Ali for what he did there, because a lot of companies didn't get their stock out on time. We got our orders in early, and we foresaw the problems in shipping, and we hustled, and we got stock in time, which again will have helped us, because other people didn't have stock, so there was less competition for whatever demand there was. So actually we did well on that, and we leveraged relationships with our factories to make sure that we were at the front of the queue for what production capacity they had, because they had their own ups and downs at different times. Factories shut, factories open, and some of that's luck depending on which Chinese region you are and what rules they had. What was difficult was we couldn't visit our factories for 3 years, and we definitely had some quality issues coming out of the pandemic, because we hadn't been able to see and work closely with our partners during that time. But now that we've been able to go back, so I think it's only 18 months since we've been able to go back. I mean,
that's crazy.
Forget how long, China were the last out of everything, and the last to lift the visa restrictions. So in that last 18 months, we've had to do a lot of work, but we've now got on top of that. And I think, like everything else, we've now moved the quality ahead of even where it was before the pandemic.
Yeah. And I'll hand over to you in a wee second, actually, Alex, but how many markets or countries are you now selling in?
So direct to consumer, we sell in the US, which is the biggest, 60% of our sales. And then we do Mexico and Canada. We do the UK. And then we have fully translated listings for all of our products in Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. But the other part of the Amazon distribution network in Europe, which is great, pan-European distribution, is you also get access to the Netherlands, to Belgium, to Sweden. They just expanded it to Turkey and to Poland. So all these other markets that Amazon is gaining traction in, that we will be able, as they get more and more market share there, we will be able to invest in the listings and catch that up. So if we look at that growth plan that we've got to keep us growing steadily and profitably, we will add more products to what we're doing. We will continue to get better at our distribution and our selling ability to take more market share. And we will also expand the territories by generally following where Amazon expands to, because we have a success model. We understand every bit of that value chain. And yes, when you move to a new country, there is a little bit of difference, but let's say it's 10 or 15% difference. So 85% of what we do, we know and we understand. So we can grow through that. And it is really powerful. So Canada is a great example. We were fulfilling our Canadian orders last year through stock that was in the US. We then did a test. We took, following that mantra of test small, test quick, we put 10 or 20 products into stock in Canada, where you then get quicker delivery times and cheaper delivery times and no worries about cross-border taxis. And we saw the level of growth we got on those products, and we thought, well, we'll put the whole range in there. And therefore, we've taken that business from about a 1 million a year Canadian dollar business to a 4 million a year Canadian dollar business with no further investment in products or anything. It is just wringing more value out of the assets that we already had. So as Amazon opens new markets, that will underpin the sort of geographical expansion that we'll have.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And so what about Asia then? Would that... is there any opportunity?
Asia, I mean, it's a different cultural environment. So costumes are cultural, and the Anglo-Saxon markets, we know what we dress up for generally, and there's nuances within it. But it's Halloween, it's parties, it's decades, it's stuff for the kids, it's superheroes, etc. But even within that, you go into Europe, their biggest costume occasion, although Halloween is growing fast, is European Carnival, which is Lent related. And they have a massive 3-day costume party across all the Catholic areas of southern Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. So it's our second biggest season after Halloween.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I've never even heard of that.
We'd never heard of it either. It was like when we first launched in Germany, the guy who was helping us with us, you need to get more stock into Germany. And we're like, I don't think we need to get more stock into Germany. And we absolutely sold out in days. Wow. And it's great because it's not just scary products. They buy everything. Anything goes for Carnival. Right. So I think if anyone wants a good party, they need to head to Cologne for Lent. Yeah. Because that is the center of it. And it's an amazing 3 days.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow. What a plan you've got ahead. It sounds incredible.
Correct.
Fraser, we ask all of our guests, what is your guiding principle in business?
It's something I've talked about in the business. It is to test quickly and cheaply. Therefore, you don't bet the farm. So if your idea goes wrong, you're okay. But you're testing new things and you will find things that work. And when they work, you scale them. And that is exactly what we have done. If you look at the beginning of the business, when we found Morphsuits, then we scaled Morphsuits. Our initial advertising through Facebook, we worked out a model that, okay, we recruit them as fans and then we'll be top of mind when they have an occasion. That worked. So we poured money into that and that powered some of our initial growth. Yeah. And now Amazon, we have a success model on how we launch and create new products. We know that works. We proved it with 50 products in the first year and we've now scaled that. So we're doing 200 a year and we'll scale that further to do more.
Do you know, it's interesting. I just love... the strapline you shared with us earlier on, fun product, serious business. That's exactly what's coming through here is just exactly what that strapline says. And to kind of hear to where you've got to and where you're going still, I think, Edinburgh Business Stories is about hearing about Edinburgh businesses and great stories. And I think what a success story, yeah?
Yeah.
So congratulations on what you've done and keep going, man.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it has been fun.
Serious.
But it's also a serious business. So hopefully we're living up to what we're talking about.
Yeah, nice. Amazing. Thank you for coming and sharing your story. And we look forward to seeing the growth in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been really good to talk about it.
Well done.
Great.
Cheers.